Hello and welcome to Stoicism, Philosophy as a Way of Life. My name is Donald Robertson, and today's guest is Mark Forstater, the producer of over 30 films, including Monty Python and the Holy Grail. He's the author of a number of books, including the Spiritual Teachings of a guy called Marcus Aurelius, the Spiritual Teachings of another guy called Seneca, that you might have heard of, and the Living Wisdom of Socrates. That's a lot of wisdom, as well as books on yogic philosophy and Daoism, so Eastern wisdom as well. His most recent book, The Seventh Python, A Twat's Tale, documents his experience of working with the Pythons a long time ago and a protracted legal battle years later, decades later, that he found himself fighting and winning. So first of all, hi, Mark. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Hello, Donald. Nice to be here.
So let's get right into your interest in Stoicism. How did you first get into Marcus Aurelius and Seneca?
Okay, I'm going to give you a little bit of history because it's a strange story, but it's a kind of story I kind of like. In around 1998, I wanted to make an audiobook of the Tao Te Ching, and I was able to make it. And got it distributed by Hodder and Stoughton, UK publisher. And a year later, they came back and said, do you have any more ideas for audiobooks? So I have plenty of ideas for audiobooks. So I gave them 4. I gave them the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, which at that point I had never actually read, but I knew of them. I gave them Seneca. I gave them yoga, philosophy, and Daoism. And they said, great. So I started to try to put together an audiobook about the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius. And I was trying to find a text that I thought was a good text for the meditations. And I couldn't find one because at that time, the recent translations were about 1960, and they felt to me a little Christian, a little dusty, a little old-fashioned, and I didn't see they didn't feel like the Marcus Aurelius that I was getting from the actual content of his meditation. So I found a Victorian translation that was said to be absolutely literal from the Greek, and I thought, okay, I can rewrite this one, because I have a feeling of what Marcus Aurelius is saying, and this gives me the absolute literal translation, which I can play with, and that's what I did. I rewrote those Victorian translations into a version that I thought felt like the Marcus Aurelius that I was reading, and the one I was reading was a man who was very similar to the Buddhists. I felt that his view of life and the Buddhist view of life were very, very similar. I felt the same kind of interest and comments and experiences, and so that's what got me doing that. But I realized in the middle of doing this writing that I was creating a new copyright, and so I thought, well, maybe this is a book. So I approached an agent. I've approached several agents in New York, and one said this will never be a book that anyone will want to read.
Why? I'm interested. Why?
I don't know why. I mean, obviously, but the other agent was even more surprising. She said to me, "I've never heard of this book."
Yeah.
I said, "Okay, go to Barnes and Noble and pick up a copy." So the next day she phones me and said, I went to Barnes & Noble, I found it, I went to the cashier, and the cashier said, this is the most wonderful book. I read it every night before I go to bed. So she said, I think you could have a book here, but you have to write
something.
Yeah, but you have to write the introduction. Okay. Writing an introduction. I'd never written anything longer than 2 pages before, maybe a film synopsis. I never wrote essays at college or in high school, so writing an introduction was like, wow, do I have to really do this? So anyway, I started. And I had a version which was halfway through, I think, and I showed it to my ex-wife, my wife at the time. And she read it, and she said to me, "You sound like a professor." Because the introductions I've always read were in Penguin books by professors. She said, "Well, why don't you write about what you got out of this and why what it's affecting your life?" And I said, "Okay," and I started again, and that's how I wrote the introduction. And so I learned about Marcus Aurelius, and I learned about Stoicism in order to write that introduction.
What do you think? Let's pause over that for a moment then. What do you think are the main ideas that you took away from Marcus Aurelius and Seneca as well? Was it you did the Seneca one shortly after doing Marcus Aurelius?
Yeah. The Marcus Aurelius book sold 12,000 copies in hardback. That's a lot for a philosophy book. And so they said, "Oh, let's do the Seneca one." So I asked a friend of mine to work with me on Seneca. And she did the text of Seneca's work. I did an introduction. And it was from that introduction that I learned about Seneca, and I'll talk to you about him in a minute. But this is how the publishing business works. They had a tremendous success with Marcus Aurelius. Instead of putting out a softback of the book, they decided to publish the hardback of Seneca at the same time as they were doing the softback of the Marcus Aurelius. So what that did was they canceled each other out. It was stupid. And this is a marketing for a publishing company that's 100 years old. I mean, it was nonsense. So what happened was they then said, "Oh, these books don't sell, but we have a contract with you, so we'll pay you for writing the books." And I thought, well, I'm getting a great education here. I want to write these books because I'm learning a tremendous amount by writing them. So that's what happened. So, yeah.
I was going to say, chronologically, this might be maybe this is this might even be a touchy subject in a way, but like you were ahead of the curve, because Stoicism, I don't know if you know it, went on to become kind of trendy, but not that long after. You were early. So that book of Marcus Aurelius was published when exactly?
I think it was 2000.
2000. That's when the movie Gladiator came out.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. You're right. I watched the movie Gladiator, and there was Marcus sitting in his tent writing his meditations. I thought, wow, that's very nice timing.
And that did make Marcus Aurelius put him on people's radar. Like, interest in the meditations of Marcus Aurelius grew as a result of that movie. And then, but it wasn't until maybe probably the biggest book on Stoicism to this day is Ryan Holiday's book, The Obstacle is the Way. But that didn't come out till 2014, I think. So quite a while later. And since then, there's been like the floodgates have opened.
Yes, I know.
You probably see how many books on Stoicism there are now.
Yeah.
It's all over the internet.
So maybe I had an influence in Stoicism becoming reborn.
Well, like the young people say, you were into it before it was cool.
There you go.
Yeah.
Okay.
And maybe time for a second edition.
Well, yeah, I would be. I've also often thought about republishing my books, but I have a lot of other things to do, and I will get around to it one day. But I do want to republish one of my books, a Taoist book, which I'm working on now. But yeah, those I would love to republish them, but I'd have to change them. So the problem was that when I got into Seneca, I realized there was an enormous difference between Marcus Aurelius and Seneca. And the difference was that Marcus Aurelius was an emperor who wanted to be a philosopher, really. And Seneca was a philosopher who would have been very happy being an emperor.
Accurate.
All right, because he was the second. He and his military counterpart ran the empire for Nero. He was the second most powerful man and also richest man in the Roman Empire. And I am sitting here in London on land that he owned. He owned the British Isles. That was his. So Marcus Aurelius walked the walk Seneca talked the talk. That was my final realization from reading about his life and what he read and what he wrote. I mean, he was a brilliant writer, very, but he wasn't really a Stoic. He was a Stoic and an Epicurean. He delved into all the philosophies that he could and got something out of them and repackaged them, and he was very good at it, but he wasn't a Stoic.
He was professionally, he was kind of, he was really a professional writer and a rhetoric teacher to Nero, but he was never a philosophy teacher.
No, but he tried to be a philosophy teacher to other people. He wrote books of philosophy, writings. But he started out as a lawyer.
Yeah,
he was a lawyer, and he had an affair with a woman who was married, and that got him sent into exile.
Yeah,
and he would have remained in exile until Nero's mother said, "I need a tutor for my son to teach him," and she brought him back to become Nero's tutor.
I'll tell you another bit of trivia about Seneca. He, for someone who was so strongly associated with philosophy, as far as we know, he never actually traveled to Athens to study Stoicism, or to study philosophy, which is what a kind of pilgrimage that most people would normally make if they really wanted to be, philosophy professors or teachers. So the people that he studied philosophy with are not very particularly well known figures. They're Roman teachers. So he's a curious figure in some ways. But you mentioned earlier that when you were writing the introduction, you kind of pivoted a little bit and you made it more about what Marcus Aurelius initially meant to you and what you'd taken from him. So I wondered if you could say a little bit more about what are the main things. What did Marcus Aurelius do for you personally? Like, what did you find in him? What did you take away from reading the Meditations?
Okay, it's very hard for me to kind of separate that from having lived with it and carried on with his thoughts. In fact, I had a stronger link with Epictetus, and it may well be. I mean, Epictetus was a slave, and his Roman slave owner gave him his freedom. Now, maybe Seneca had a hand in that, because the slave owner was a friend of Nero. I would like to think that maybe Seneca did have a hand in that and helped Epictetus become a teacher on his own.
I've got some news for you on that front.
Okay.
I think it's unlikely. Because the guy that owned Epictetus had his name is a bit of a mouthful. He was called Epaphroditus, and he was the Greek secretary to Nero. But he wasn't a big fan of Seneca.
Okay.
Like, he was actually the guy that accused Seneca initially of being involved in what's called the Piso conspiracy, and that was Epaphroditus, like Epictetus' owner, went to Nero and said, "Seneca's conspiring against you, and so are a bunch of these other senators," and that was actually what led to Seneca getting the chop and having to die by forced suicide.
Yeah.
So it's darker than that. Like, Epictetus' owner was involved in them bumping off Seneca.
Yeah, that sounds correct. I'm glad you could tell me the truth of that. That's great. Epictetus, obviously, he never wrote a book, but he has his notes from his classes. Some of his students kept his notes, and I found a couple of things from that were very, very good. First of all, obviously, all of his students must have been relatively aristocratic young men.
Yeah.
And he was trying to teach them about life as he understood it from the Stoic tradition. So I liked two things that he said that I remember very vividly. One is when he talks about how I guess it must have been a buffalo. When a buffalo is attacked by a lion, the buffalo comes to realize its power, because it stops the lion. The buffalo has the power to stop a lion, but it doesn't know it has this power until it happens.
Neither did I. I remember reading that and thinking, what does it do to a lion? And then I found, I looked up some videos and I saw what they do apparently is toss them up in the air on their horns.
Yep, exactly. I've seen a car, the same thing done to a car by a rhino.
Yeah.
So they're powerful. They're big beasts. They're very powerful. They're fast, but they don't know it until a moment comes when they have to perform. And I thought that was a very, very interesting thing, because I think it's exactly like us. We don't know what we're capable of until we're faced with something, and then it's a test in a way. So the other thing from Epictetus that I liked very much is that Stoicism, when I started to write, obviously had that kind of stiff upper lip 19th century British connotation. But Epictetus talks about life as a festival, and life gives you the ability to enjoy that festival and take part in that festival. And I thought, well, if he thinks life is a festival, that's no stiff upper lip, because you get a feeling that from Stoicism, if you read it one way, that you always have to be on guard, that it's a protective, defensive kind of way of living, that you're constantly thinking, is this mine? What is it? What is this mine only? Can I do it? But it's not like that. Epictetus says life is a festival, and you just have to enjoy living it yourself as you choose to do things.
I'll tell you another bit of trivia about Epictetus that kind of fits in with your idea that maybe, he wasn't the kind of stiff upper lip character that he seems at first. There's a passage in the discourses where, in passing, he says to his students, of course, there's nothing better than seeing a family with their kids in tow. And he says, if a small child is playing on the ground, it would be unnatural not to want to get down on all fours and play with it. And so that makes him seem like a bit of a softie, like at heart. He thinks any normal human being, when they see little kids playing, wants to join in and play with them. So at the one hand, he's like talking about these bulls tossing lions in their horns, all that kind of stuff. On the other hand, he seems to be a guy who genuinely loves children, like, and has a bit of a kind of like, a soft heart in that regard.
That's interesting. I didn't.
There's a warmth to him.
I didn't remember that, but that is very interesting, because actually, I also found from Stoicism. Obviously, I'd been studying, just to go back, when I was a student, university, I read some Plato, especially Death of Socrates, which impressed me very much. I am Jewish, and when I was growing up, I'm my family's secular. I'm not a religious Jew, but I read the prophets. I read parts of the Bible. I read, I read the Bible, but I also read all the New Testament, and I was very impressed by Jesus. Now, Jesus is Jewish, but and he only taught Jews. He was not a Christian. Paul made Christianity, so I was very impressed with Judeo-Christian beliefs and values, and so that's really the foundation of my philosophy. That's where I come from. Then I learned about Socrates at university. I tried to read the Tao Te Ching when I was at university. I couldn't understand a word of it. It made no sense to me.
I had exactly the same feeling when I was a young guy. I was reading different religious texts. I read the Tao Te Ching. It said something like running the state is like frying small fish. I thought, I've got no idea what this guy's on about.
Yeah. Right. So you're absolutely right. So I've been studying this for 50 years. I now understand what he means by the fresh fish. I understand it, but it's something that it was so different from the values that I'd grown up with that it just I didn't understand the words. They were English translated, but I didn't understand them, and I had to put it down. And so the Tao Te Ching and Daoism talks about going in reverse. That is becoming younger becoming younger, both mentally and physically. And therefore, the Tao Te Ching says, go back to being an infant. And I think that Epictetus had that instinctive life within himself of being young.
His character comes through somehow, yeah, and a lot of people warm to Epictetus, even though he can seem quite harsh. And I think, like you say, somehow a lot of people don't warm to Seneca in the same way. It's often said that the Seneca that we know of from the Roman histories and the Seneca that we know of from his own writings seem like two different people. And I think when people read Seneca and they get into it, they kind of underestimate the extent to which he was a professional rhetorician and he's writing propaganda. So he writes some really cool philosophical stuff, but he's also managing his own public image in his writings. He virtually never mentions Nero, in the little bits in his letters and so on when he talks about his life. So he's carefully curating his image like a modern politician might. And then we go to the histories and what other people wrote about him. They have very different things to say about his character. I think some people kind of pick up on that. But Epictetus kind of shines through more, and Marcus Aurelius. The Meditations is uncurated as far as we know. It wasn't intended for publication, so arguably we have more of a glimpse into his personality. We also are very lucky to have a cache of letters from Marcus Aurelius that, as far as we know, weren't intended for publication between Marcus and his rhetoric teacher Fronto. So that gives us an unusual, like a window into his private life.
I've never read those. I didn't know they existed.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of them, and they're quite light on philosophy, very light on philosophy. But what they do is give us a kind of insight into, in a way, how mundane the life is of one of the most powerful men in the world. So he talks a lot about insomnia, headaches, how his kids are getting on, where he's going on holiday, stuff like that. Fronto complains a lot about his gout, things like that. It seems kind of banal in a way, but it's sort of reassuring, But Marcus comes across as very humane, very humorous. One thing that I would say shines through, that we can say there's evidence of by observing the way he writes and talks, is we see him in action dealing with interpersonal conflicts at one point between his friends. And you could see firsthand that he's very skilled at managing conflicts, but resolving conflicts between his family friends. And that kind of, I think, indicates somebody who probably has skill, knowledge, experience, or natural ability as a diplomat. Perhaps he knows how to deal with. He clearly knows how to deal with people.
But I think that comes from Stoic precepts.
Yeah,
because in Stoicism, you have to know what it is that you have control of, what is yours, and what is not yours. Once you know that, it makes you very impartial, and that impartiality is what enables someone like Marcus Aurelius to deal with all kinds of people. Once he despises, once he loves, once he doesn't care, he's impartial.
Well, that's one of the things that you took from Stoicism, then, I would say, by the sounds of it. I think that's, people sometimes call that the dichotomy of control today, this kind of division between what's up to us and what isn't up to us. It sounds like you kind of assimilated that along the way.
Yeah, I did take that in, because obviously he talks about that a lot. And in a sense, I'd been led up to that by the writings. I read Daoism, Zen, Buddhism. I read really the Eastern philosophies. I read all of them a lot. And
you also mentioned Socrates a moment ago. I wanted to come back to that, if that's okay.
Yeah.
And then maybe we'll talk a little bit more about Eastern philosophies in a bit. So, because you wrote a book about Socrates, was that shortly after the other ones, or where does that fit into the chronology? And how did you feel what did you take from Socrates? How do you feel that Socrates compares to the Stoics? You already mentioned that maybe you'd read Plato first, like a bit earlier.
Yeah, when I was at university, I'd read a bit of Plato. Mainly, this I think was the Death of Socrates. I wasn't. I also tried to read Wittgenstein when I was at university, but I could never really get into where he was. It never really gave me the same insights. So what happened was I finished the 4 books for Hodder and Stoughton, and I decided to write another one on my own about Socrates, because I admired Socrates very much. And what I found in researching him was that he was a meditator. When on the battlefield, he would be standing there virtually sometimes all night in one place, meditating. He was clearly a meditator. And I thought that for someone who is given the chance to escape death by easily getting away and living somewhere else, he didn't want to go. He said, "No, I've been given the death sentence. I'm going to take it." And he knew that he would then create lots of other Socrates by doing that, I'm sure. I mean, he understood that he was a martyr, and he was happy to do it. I think the same thing of Jesus. I think Jesus knew that he wasn't going to live a long time. And so riding that donkey into Jerusalem was saying, I don't care what happens to me. I'm just going to do this because this is the right thing to do. And people who are willing to do the right thing and pay the penalty for it, they've never been many of them. And there's even less now than there used to be.
I think there have been some people that see parallels between Socrates and Jesus. I wonder, what do you think are the similarities between, like, how would you compare Socrates to Seneca and Marcus Aurelius? Like, did you get something from Socrates that you didn't get from the Stoics, or do you feel that they complement each other? How would you compare them?
Wow. Okay. Well, obviously, having researched Seneca for quite a long time, I wrote a critical biography of him as my part of the book. So I really didn't believe that he was a philosopher. I thought that he was his father was a rhetorician, and he taught his children how to do it. They were very skilled, and that's why he became a lawyer. He was a very good lawyer in the courts, and then he obviously was ambitious, and it's that ambition that led him astray, to me.
He's very clearly, very ambitious individual.
Yeah,
He's climbing the greasy pole.
Yeah. That's what. So and so in the end, his father was dead, which is probably good, because his father would not have been happy to see Seneca coming to the Senate and explaining why Nero had to kill his mother. Right. That's where he ended up. He had to go to the Senate for Nero and say, shit, rubbish. Right.
That's propaganda.
Yeah. Seneca would do that. He had to. That's his life. Socrates wouldn't do that.
He says something in that speech that's quite bizarre. So he gives another speech that we have the text of on clemency, if I remember rightly, where he says of Nero, he paints Nero out to be like a philosopher king. And he says, so he's urging him to greater clemency, which is good, but he's also hyping him up to say that he's this wise leader. He says, your hands are unstained by blood,
Wow.
which almost sounds like a joke.
Wow.
Because Nero, many people believed, had poisoned his younger half-brother, Britannicus, before when he was about 14, just before he reached adulthood. So it sounds almost like a bit of a dark joke coming from a rhetorician like Seneca to say, yeah you've got no blood on your hands because you go around poisoning people instead. Like,
you bring up the philosopher king. When I first heard about Marcus Aurelius, I thought, oh, wow, Plato said there would be one day that we'd have a philosopher king, and here he is. They had one. So that interested me. That was a connection that that I thought was very good. And he was a philosopher king, but as with all great men and women, you can't tell what their children are going to be like. And he didn't start a succession of quality sons. His son was not up to it, and what can you do?
Son wasn't great.
Genetics has
Socrates
a tremendous role.
is, before that, people used to say that Socrates' kids never amounted to anything either. I mean, they weren't sociopaths, right? Commodus maybe, but they were like they were just kind of they were
Right.
forgotten. Like they never really distinct. They were undistinguished. The sons of Socrates.
Well, it's not every great person that has great children. I mean, everyone has their own life, and we have our genetics are filled with thousands and millions of people that we never know of who are go back in time.
Yeah,
Where
I don't
are
think
they?
we can't hold people accountable entirely. This was like a trope in ancient philosophy. They used to talk a lot about how great men often had undistinguished children, and you can't really hold them completely accountable for that. Another reason, though, is that in the ancient world, men didn't have that much involvement in the upbringing of their children, especially noblemen. It was mainly left to women and slaves, like especially when the children were quite young. So it's not like Marcus was kind of had as much influence over Commodus as a modern day father might have over his son. And we're told actually that he did as much as he could to find the best teachers for him. But the explanation that we're given for Commodus actually is that he was kind of corrupted by hangers on. So there were a crowd, he got in with the wrong crowd. There were a bunch of people around him that wanted him just to party and take advantage of his wealth and position. And that was Marcus actually left behind a mentor for him, a guy, his son-in-law, a guy called Pompeianus, a Roman general. And he said, I want you to keep an eye on Commodus. And they were in a military fort at the time, a fortress, a legionary fortress on the frontier when Marcus died. And not long after Marcus died, Commodus bailed and went back to Rome and left Pompeianus behind. So he kind of bailed on the guy that was supposed to be keeping him in line. Basically, that was Marcus's final attempt to kind of make sure he didn't go off the rails.
Well, it's very hard, isn't it? I mean, when you're growing up rich and powerful, everything's open to you. So many rich and powerful people are corrupt for that, and it's easy to get into that. It's harder.
Power corrupts.
Yeah. Well, we see it every day when we read the news. I mean, Donald Trump is not a stoicist. Right?
I was going to ask you a little bit. I think this might be a tough question, but we'll ask the tough questions here. Having spoken to some people, I wanted to ask you something about movies, right? Because I know first and foremost that you're a guy that loves movies, and you have a whole career spanning the movie industry. So, and it might sound like an odd question, but I believe that people from different backgrounds often have some insight into philosophy or psychology that kind of comes from their experience. I was talking to a guy once who was a director, and he told me this quote from Charlie Chaplin. Chaplin supposedly said, "Life is a tragedy when it's seen in close-up, but a comedy in long shot." And it reminded me of something that the Stoics say. So Marcus Aurelius talks quite a lot about something that people call the view from above, imagining life as if in an extreme long shot. And certainly in Stoicism, we find one of the psychological techniques or spiritual techniques they use seems to involve shifting our perspective. And it reminded me of directing movies, and the way that we can tell a story from different angles using different shots, and it can affect the emotional impact that it has. And I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that. I often, as a coach and as a therapist, when I'm working with clients, if they work in movies, say if a client is worrying about the future, I might say to them, can you think of the worries that you have about future almost like you're writing a screenplay or making a movie? And is it possible that the way that you're editing this movie is making it actually more anxiety provoking and harder for, is there like another version of the problem shot from a different perspective or edited in a different way that might make it easier for you to deal with it?
I think you're right, because as I understand it, our vision is not the way we think it works. It doesn't work the way we think it works. We think, oh, from outside come impressions. Our brain makes sense of them, gives us pictures, and that's reality we're seeing. According to the latest, as I understand it, our vision actually goes outwards. Our vision is what it expects to find, which means that on one hand you could say, well, that's like, okay, is that like an hallucination, or is it like a dream that you're putting onto the world what you want to find? So if you're, as you say, filled with fear or anxieties, you are projecting out into the world all those things. That's what you're projecting. Whereas if you were, say, someone, I'll give you a movie instance. If you were Frank Capra, you know who Frank Capra is?
I recognize the name. Who is he?
It's a Wonderful World.
Oh, right, got you. Okay.
Yeah. Frank Capra made Mr. Deeds Goes to Washington. Mr. Smith Builds His Dream House. He made American fables of society as a very, very positive, hopeful society, right? So Frank Capra was projecting into his films this illusion. He was an Italian immigrant to America, and he was putting that American dream into his movies. He was projecting them into his films, and I think that's what films do. The director, the writer, they take the world that they understand and they put it into a story. And that's what we see. So I have, there's one fact that I know, which I'd like to just say, because I think it reflects this, is that Napoleon said that if you want to know what someone is like, just figure out what was the world when they were 20 years old. Because the world when they were 20 is the world that they're taking into the future, unless they've been obviously changed radically by something else. And I think that's certainly that's true with me. I still think I'm 20 years old, and the world that I grew up in, when I was 20, President Kennedy was assassinated, and it gave me a view of America that I knew America had a history of assassinating its presidents. And then the next thing you know, we're in Vietnam. And I couldn't stay in America after that. I just felt like this is not my country. I have to get out. I can't stay sane and live here. So I left because of the Vietnam War and came to Britain. And so that's what got me here.
Maybe that leads on into one of the other questions that I was going to ask you, because I know one of the things that looms large in your biography, because you've written a book about it, and I saw a clip of you on YouTube talking about this in like a news channel or something. This legal battle that you went through, I'm guessing that was kind of stressful. And I wondered whether you found that Stoicism or Socrates or Daoism or yoga philosophy, like the things that you've been studying over the years, did those help you to deal with this? How many years are we talking about here, by the way? This went on for a long
9 years, 8 to 9 years.
8 or 9 years.
Long time. It had an effect on me physically, and it's taken me all this time to get rid of the effect on my body of the stress that I was living under for such a long period of time. Mentally, I use Daoism. And because in my book, I quote from my diaries at the time. And it was Daoism which was giving me a way to cope with this tremendous stress and what was happening. And I think, obviously, Stoicism gave me a very clear view of deciding, well, what are the things that I can deal with and what are the things I don't have to deal with. You can say, means you can say, well, this is necessary and this is unnecessary. It makes you define where you can control things, where you can act, and where it's not worth acting, because it's just a waste of time. And I think that was really helpful to me, because I found that in all the Zen and Taoist books, they have a phrase when they ask about somebody: how does he use his mind? It's always he, because it was all but how does he use his mind? And I've always found that very interesting, because we would never use that phrase. How do you use your mind? Your mind uses you. Your mind is the engine that's running you. But when you use your mind, which is what the Stoics do, and the Taoists do, and the Zens do, when you use your mind, you can decide that you're going to have a different mind. You're going to change your mind, because you can do that. In Taoism, it's called self-refinement. You refine your mind so that it's doing what you want it to do, not what you've been grown up and conditioned to do.
Yeah. I think you're right. This is one of the fundamental things. Like, if you don't have that insight, then it's like you take your hands off the steering wheel or something, But it's once you begin to see your mind as a tool and something that you could use in different ways, it's like putting yourself back in the driving seat and your hands back on the steering wheel. You can take a little bit more control over your life.
Absolutely.
I don't want to get too much into the details of what happened, but it had to do with money that was owed you.
Yeah. Basically, I signed a contract with them to produce the film. I produced it. And
Holy Grail.
Holy Grail. And in that contract, I have a share of all the ancillary. In other words, I have a share of the film, but I also have a share of music, of anything else that's not the film. I have a separate share. And they paid me for 30 years for that share, like clockwork. But a new manager came on board. They changed managers. A new manager looked at my contract and said, I think you've been cheating us for 30 years. We've been paying you under
false money back.
No, they couldn't claw it back, but they said in the future, we only want to give you
more.
No more. We'll only And I said, no, you can't do that. This is the contract was done. And anyway, they wouldn't give in. And so I tried for years not to go to court. I tried because it just didn't make sense to me why they were doing this. It wasn't the money.
These were your friends, basically. Is that right? Or some of them were. Yeah.
Terry Gilliam and I went to film school together. We shared a flat together. I helped Terry Gilliam direct a movie. I helped Terry Jones direct a movie. Michael Palin became an actor because of it. Graham Chapman, who was a friend of mine, became an actor. I mean, Eric Idle managed to make Spamalot because of this film. I've made them lots of money, and they turned around.
A lot of money.
Yeah. And so I don't think Eric wanted me to see the share of Spamalot. I think that's what it was. Yeah. I don't think he thought I deserved it.
One thing I noticed is, from running a business over the years, I've been in maybe 4 or 5 times I've been involved in some sort of legal wrangle. Nothing on that scale. I think the worst one for me went on for a couple of years or something like that. And it is stressful. It can be. One thing that happened to me, I always remember it was a few days before Christmas, and I had no word of it coming. I was opening the mail each day and we were getting Christmas cards. And then among the Christmas cards one day, there was a big manila envelope with a wad of papers in it, 50 pages or 100 pages, with some legal thing that I had to. I thought, what a great Christmas present! It wasn't
exactly.
I opened up thinking, what? You've got to be kidding!
Good timing, eh?
And among the Christmas cards, and it was kind of it was a big deal. But I mentioned that because, from a psychological point of view, we now know that one of the most toxic things that people struggle with is what we call rumination. So rumination is kind of prolonged thinking, dwelling on stuff, brooding on a subject, going over and over something in your mind. And so generally in CBT, we teach people to notice rumination, to curtail it, nip it in the bud, to be able to manage when and where they're doing it, not to spend hours and hours going over and over things in fine detail in the mind. So particularly when people are prone to depression, they spend many hours a day ruminating over their problems. And when people are prone to generalized anxiety, they often ruminate or worry about threats in the future. And so usually we teach people to control that or to modify it. When you're embroiled in a legal battle, I think sometimes it's almost impossible to avoid it, because you'll get emails and documents that you have to go through that take hours in fine detail over and over again. Sometimes people saying, like, mean things about you, or accusations, saying things that are like sometimes false, that you have to then go over the history of things that happened years ago. So one of the things I found is it can be quite difficult to avoid getting sucked into spending many hours dwelling on pretty unpleasant things, when you're involved in a legal battle.
Well, the psychology of litigation is prolong it, because the party that has the least amount of money is either going to run out of money, or their health will become degraded, or they'll die. That's the psychology of litigation. So their lawyers must have been very happy to prolong it, because there were 6 rich guys against me. So, but I didn't succumb because of the training that I'd had. The Stoic training, the Taoist training, the Zen. I knew how to use my mind, but my body was getting really destroyed by it. But I survived, and I've recovered my body. But some people, litigation is I won, but I lost too. I won, but I lost the house. So I lost, but I won. But I didn't want to. I didn't want to give in out of self-respect. I didn't want to say, okay, I'll take less because you guys don't want to pay me. I didn't think that was right. I made them, when I got involved with them, they had made one film. It was called And Now for Something Completely Different. It was a failure, and no one wanted to fund their film. They wanted to direct a film. No one wanted to fund it. So I helped them raise that money and produce the film. I've never been given a thanks for it.
Yeah.
Instead, they tried to cheat me. I mean, who are these people? I have no idea who they are. Really.
Yeah, I'm going to say something about Monty Python just because somebody said it. I heard it once and I thought it was kind of humorous. And I grew up watching reruns of Monty Python on TV. So I hope nobody takes this the wrong way, right? Because I love Monty Python. I think they're fantastic. But it was some sketch show or something. I can't remember exactly the context. And they were kind of joking about the worst forms of torture. And one guy said, I'm going to tie you to a chair in a basement and make you watch all the unfunny parts of Monty Python. And I knew exactly what that meant, because the Monty Python show was kind of hit and miss. But that was because they were given the creative freedom to do really, at the time, crazy experimental stuff. And I don't know what the hit rate would be. Like, I felt when I was watching it, there would be 1 or 2 funny skits that made it worth sitting through a lot of other stuff that it didn't necessarily land, like, for me anyway. But I think it tells me, I always took something from that of great value, because I thought you have to take risks to succeed creatively in life. And if they weren't allowed the freedom to make a lot of stuff that was of pretty dubious value in retrospect that nobody talks about anymore, like, they wouldn't have made all of the sketches that have gone down in comedy history and gone on to make movies like The Holy Grail, that were like classics.
Oh, I agree with you, but I liked them more than you did. I mean, of course, I was there at the beginning. I mean, Terry Gilliam and I became friends again in London, having been friends in New York. And that was just prior to the Monty Python TV show starting up. So he introduced me to Palin and Jones, and we were friends, and I was very happy that they asked me to produce the film for them. That was a great great thing. But really, all I can say is that when Eric Idle does a tour called the Greedy Bastard Tour,
Right.
it's not a joke. It's not a joke. That's all I'd have to say.
Well, as we're talking about movies, I thought a good place to finish would be. I've always thought that there would be scope for somebody. I know you love Marcus Aurelius. Like, I think someone could make another movie one day about Marcus Aurelius. So by other movie, I mean we mentioned Gladiator early, or Richard Harris plays him, and then there's a movie with Alec Guinness in it from the '60s called The Fall of the Roman Empire.
Yeah, I've seen that
That's
too.
quite
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
But neither
Yeah.
of them have that much. I know you can't easily have a movie where you like go deep into the meditations, but I kind of thought it would be cool if there was just like a little bit more reference to the philosophy. Like even a few really cool sayings, because Marcus Aurelius has some good tons of phrases and sayings. Like, can imagine people, there could have just been a couple of good quotes from Marcus Aurelius in Gladiator, and then maybe people would have gone away. Young guys would have watched it, and they would have remembered some of this.
If you were watching it, you didn't know what he was writing in his big book.
Yeah,
but you know the meditations. You knew that's what he was writing, but you'd had to know that.
And he had quite. It would be like a prequel to Gladiator. Like he had quite a colorful life. He had an interesting life, and the other one is Socrates. Socrates was like an interesting guy. Like he had a very active life. He knew some. So one of the things that makes some of these guys interesting in the ancient world is the characters that surround them, the constellations that surround them. So Socrates was surrounded by some of the most powerful and colorful individuals of his era. Like he knew Pericles, the great statesman, Alcibiades, this kind of like notorious sort of adventurer character. Like these were his friends that he hung out with and did philosophy with. So I think that lends itself in some ways to dramatization. But what would be brutal would be to sit and watch a televised version of some of Plato's dialogues, like because the Republic.
Well, actually, I think you're right. Socrates' life would be interesting because he also, who was the other student he had who wrote?
Xenophon.
Xenophon wrote not very good histories, but yeah, Xenophon was also a student of his. And I mean, look, it's probably because of Alcibiades that Socrates had so many enemies.
Mm-hmm.
Because Alcibiades, I mean, he was hated by many people in Athens, and I'm sure that didn't help Socrates when he came to be on trial.
I like to think Socrates' execution was overdetermined. Like the Athenians, I think, had like multiple reasons. I think the amazing thing about Socrates is that they didn't bump him off sooner. Like it had been brewing for a while. Like, do you know? And I thought about that a lot, and I thought, in all seriousness, is there a reason why they didn't get rid of him sooner? Because they did get rid of quite a few they got rid of other philosophers. And I think one of the reasons was most of the philosophers that preceded him were foreigners that toured the world and traveled to Athens. Socrates was thoroughly Athenian, and that was a big deal. But it also meant not only was he a native Athenian, but he was a member of the hoplite class. Like he was supposedly poor, but he was kind of upper middle class, and he was a soldier and a highly regarded military veteran. He saved once, maybe twice, the lives of officers, we're told, in battle. And I think in Athenian society, that makes a difference. Like, even if somebody's being really annoying and asking, really upsetting the apple cart and rocking the boat, you can't easily give somebody who's a war hero the chop in Athens because people held him in quite high regard because of that.
Yeah, that's true. And he didn't want
They
to
got
leave
him
Athens.
eventually.
He didn't want to leave Athens either. That's partly why he decided that he would take the poison. He didn't want to leave Athens. He was an Athenian.
Yeah, through.
I agree.
He was very loyal.
He was an amazing. That's why I wrote the book on Socrates. I admired him very much.
Yeah.
And I tried to understand his philosophy of life, how he lived it. He was a very healthy man. he was poor, but he was funded by his friends.
Yeah,
So it was
absolutely.
like a charity case. But
Yeah.
he gave the society a lot. He tried to teach the young, and the Athenians didn't like what he was teaching them, I guess. But I admired him very much. That's why I thought I'd write that book, and I published it myself.
Well, I think that's a good point to conclude. So I appreciate you spending some time with us today. I think it was another great discussion. So thanks very much for joining me, Mark. We hope that all of our listeners out there enjoyed the conversation as much as we did. Please share the link with your friends and subscribe to the Stoicism Philosophy as a Way of Life newsletter on Substack for more podcasts and articles on philosophy and psychology. Thanks again for listening. It's goodbye from me, Donald Robertson, and from my guest today, Mark Forstater. Bye, everybody.
Bye. Thanks very much, Don Blood. Really enjoyed our chat.